We're holding on Kuf Beis Amud Aleph. We're sort of in the middle of a sugya. Ketvach, we're learning as the schus for Shleima Filan Chayi Baserach and for Meir ben Cyril Perel. You don't know that it's my mother's sister's husband. It's been Baruch Hashem, he's doing better, but he had a very scary situation early in the week. Meir Greisman, you met him?
Yeah, sure.
So Meir hasn't been well this week.
Hey, poor Shleima.
Amen. So we're on Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, about 15 lines down. I'm not going to indulge myself and go back and review everything. But we'll say what we need to as we're going along, right? What we've been talking about is the concept of Kala Aymed Lizr Kazarak Dami Kama Aymed Liftais is Kapadi Dami, which came up in the context of the Gemara's discussion about a mincha of pigel. So we had come across the Brisa of Rav Shimon. Shamin later back on Kafal from the base. Rav Shimon Oimer para mitama tumas eichlin hayel v'haisel ashasa kaisha v'mishagish Shimon para niftis al gamma rachasa. So we said over there by the case of para aduma, the Rav Shimon says kol aymed liftis is kapadi dami, and that's why it's considered an eichel in spite of the fact that it's going to be burnt and made into mechatas, but since it's aymed liftis, it's kapadi dami. But we had an earlier brisa where Rav Shimon had said, "Yesh noisa shu metamat tumseichen, yesh noisa ein metamat tumseichen. Lon lefnei zrika ein metamat tumseichen, la'achad zrika metamat tumseichen." So this part, lon lefnei zrika ein metamat tumseichen. So we have the question: why don't we say kol mid lizrik is kazarak dami? If Rav Shimon holds, we saw by para that kol mid liftais is kapadi dami. Why don't we say over there we have a mitzvah to be zarik? Why don't we say that it's also kazarak dami? Amar Ravashi. So now we're going back to Kuf Beis Amud Aleph. Amar Ravashi, Amrisa l'shmaitza kameder Rav Nachman, afilu teimel lon mamish. So we had answered before. The answer was, we said it's talking about a specific case by the Noiser, that when they did the case of lon is talking about where they waited till, we had said before, they're talking about Lifnei Zrika, where it was mamish right before nightfall. So there wasn't any time to do anything else. So that's why we could say it's lon, and it's not Aymed Liftais or Lizrik. And we had said the teretz of the case of pigel was talking about now where it was mafagel in the shchita, but Bedafka was mafagel in the zrika, which again, that way there's no time before the pigel for it to become if it's a pigel by the shchita, then there was no time that it was kosher to eat. It was available to be eaten. So what's the difference? So why does it say by para that we say since he could be paid it? Why don't we say by these things also? If we're not saying the terutzim that we had suggested earlier, why don't we have that problem? So tomorrow, the iboy parak amar iboy havizarik lo yamrinon says there's a big difference. We will say by para where you have the option of being paid it, and you're even required under some circumstances to be paid it, that it's going to be considered kapara kapadi. But Lagabi Zrika, we have to take an action, a physical action, that we don't give you the credit and trade it. Say it's considered an eichel, it's considered to be something that had a shas heter, because you should have been Zarik, and you could have been Zarik, but Zarik you have to actually do the Zrika. It's not just words, it's an action. Meisvei, is this really true that wherever you need an action, it's not going to be considered as if it already took place? Klal Amar Rabbi Yeshua, Kol shahysel shas heter lekehanim ein ma'ilim ba. Kol shaloi hysel shas heter lekehanim ma'ilim ba. We come across the dinim of meila several times. There's two aspects where meila is in effect. One din is after you mekadesh, before you mekadesh a carbon, there's no din me'ilah. And once you mekadesh it, then the din of me'ilah becomes kadesh kedushas haguf, and the din me'ilah kicks in, and you're going to be a kind. If someone has hana from it, it's going to be chayv. But then there's also at the back end there's the din me'ilah that once it goes down, a level from the kedushas haguf, and it becomes roy for the Kehanim to eat it or for the Baalim to eat it, then the din me'ilah goes away. So we're saying when does that really take place? That end of the Kedushas Haguf that takes away the din me'ilah. So we say Kol Shahoisel Shas Heter Kehanim Ein Ba'ilim Ba. Once you have a Shas Heter, or it becomes mutter for the Kehanim to consume it, then there's no din me'ilah anymore. But on the other hand, if it never became mutter for the Kohen to eat, then there's a din meal. What does it mean? And now we're talking about things that became possible. So we're trying to figure out in the normal situation, the kai you zayrik the dam, and at that point the basa becomes mutter achila, and the din meal goes away. We're talking about here a carbon that became possible. So the question is, did it have a chance to lose its din meila before the psul? So we say, Ezu shas hetel kehanim. So we say, if it has a shas hetel kehanim, then there's no din meila. Ezu shas hetel kehanim, shalona v'shenidma v'shiyatza. We're going to explain exactly when this happened, but if the carbon went past its time, or it became tameh, or it was brought out of the Beis Hamikdash, but before that it was a shas hetel. Ezu shaloi hoy shaloi shas hetel kehanim. And what kind of psul will make it? It was never shas heter, and therefore the din me'ilah remains. If he shechted the animal and he had a machshavas pigel in the shchita or chutzlum kaima, so you never had an opportunity for it to become mutal kehanim. If someone who was a zor was makabel adam and he zayrik the dam, so again you never had a zrika to be mata the boss. It says that he was lon or that he was nitmo shuyatza. My love, lona mamish is not talking. Lona mamish is not exactly the same as before. Over here, lona mamish means he was lon both the basar as well as the dam, meaning before zrika. Lona mamish in this context means that he never got to the zrika. He, instead of doing the zrika, he let the day go away. You have to do zrika on the same day of the shchita. And he let the nightfall come, and the Kohen did not do the avodah. And even so, we're talking about a case where, if he wanted to, he could have been zarek the dam. And we say there's no me'ilah because he could have done zrika. Well, we had just said before in Rav Ashi and Rav Nachman that just being able to do zrika is not enough. Zrika is an action. For an action, you actually have to do it. Just being able to do is not enough. Rafal, I'm glad you can make it. We're on Kuf Beis Amid Aleph, about 2/3 of the way down. So after the Gemara, no, it's not lana mamish. Loy, ru'ya lotzis, ru'ya latama. They take out this ru'ya lana. This is a way of describing that it's a lina after the zrika. That means it's something you could either be it could be Motzei it, or it could become possible from tuma. But it was something before zrika that once it had already lana, it wouldn't be possible to have the other two take effect. So it's a way of saying that it's talking. It's not saying that if it's lana or yatsa, but saying it's ruya lana, it's a ruya latama, meaning it's after the zrika. The zrika was done bismanai, and now it could be any one of these things could passel it, and it's still going to be that's going to still remain that it's ein ma'ilim because it had the shasa kosher after the zrika. What about before zrika? What would be the din? Hachanami de ma'ilin. It's mashma that you could be ma'il that would have a din mila because it never had a shasa kosher. If that's the case, how high kosher hoyle shas heter lekehanim, but kosher loy hoyle shas heter lekehanim. If what we're saying is really that the zrika makes it that after the Zrika, there's no longer that means that the Shas had to look at and therefore whatever psul comes later will not make it that it will still not have a din mi'ila. So why when the Brisa describes the din, it says Kol Shaloi Hoisaloi Shas had to look at but it's not. We're not talking about in the past that it had a Shas heter. Kol sheyesh le Shas heter lekanim ein ma'ilim ba. V'chein kol she'ein lo Shas heter lekanim ma'ilim ba mi'baile. It should have said that if now it already if it did the zrika, then it's then it has a Shas heter. It's in the Shas heter. So whatever psul comes later is irrelevant. And if it didn't have so it's whatever has. It shouldn't say what had. It's not what happened in the past. There's no Shas Heter. The Shas Heter is now, depending on whether there's a Shas Heter will depend on whether there was a Zrika or not. So you shouldn't say whether there was a Shas Heter. You could say whether there was a Zrika. That's not what it's saying. Elo Rashi. Rashi goes back and he says a different shot. Mila Atuma Karamis. He's gonna say a different teretz. So you were asking that we see by Meila that we say that that if it was we have to go back and say we're talking about before Zrika, whereas Lon Mamish, and even so, we're saying that it's considered to be a Shas Heter because you could go be Zayrik. But we just said that we don't look at a Kol Sha'imid Lizr Kazarak Dami because it's a Maisa. So he says no, it depends on what context, what Lagabi which did. Mi'ila mishum kedusha, v'lav kedushahi. Mi'ila is not a question of whether it's an eichel or not. Mi'ila, once it has that it's roy la'achila, then it's no longer, it loses its level of kedusha, it goes down a level of kedusha. So he says for that, the fact that it's roy lizrik is enough. L'basa de pakala kedusha said, "B'may hadra achvala." How once the kedusha went away, once it no longer has the status of kedusha's damim, because we said it's oimid lizrik and it's kazarak dam. Kazarak dami is enough that it changes the level of kedusha. Tuma misham ochla v'lav ochlahu he kol heichadi boy zarak matzi zarak le. So they changed the Bach and the Shita. They all changed this lashon extensively. Whenever he's able to be zarik, he could throw it. It makes it an eichel that is then hecha the so then it switches it yud aleph the loy zarik la mashal. But in a case where he doesn't actually throw it, it's not going to make it into an eichel. To make it into an eichel, you have to actually make it an eichel. It's not like the status of kedusha that once it's changed, it stays the way it is. Eichel, the fact that you could be potentially make it into an eichel is not going to stick if it doesn't actually happen. There are certain contexts in which maybe it will help, like we're saying legabi mila, but it's not going to make it into an actual eichel that it should be metama tumas eichel.
So by meila, right? What does it mean? L'basa de pakala kedusha say. When does that happen?
That means kedusha. Basically, the point is that kedusha is easier. It's more permanent when it changes. Once the kedusha of kedusha saguf goes away, because it's oimid lizrik, and we said it's for that context, for that application, it's considered to be that it was kazarak dami. So the kedusha of kedusha saguf that would cause mila to be in effect has gone away. There's nothing to bring it back later when it turns out that he never was zayrik. As opposed to uchla, the status of eichel is something that it needs something more permanent. It doesn't change as quickly as the kedusha. Yeah. Back to Gemara, Meisvei. Back to Gemara. So is this really? The Gemara asks, is this really going to make enough gamina? Whether we're talking about gabi kedusha or gabi tuma? L'chayr, we're going to bring a raya that even by tuma, once it's oimid lizrik, it should be change its status to gabi tuma from this brisa. And maybe asham tali. An asham tali is an asham that you bring when someone's mesupik if he was over. So this is a asham that he brings in that case. The noida shaloi chata, and he finds out he brought the carbon. He brought the carbon. He means he got an animal for it, and then he found out that he actually the thing that he was mesupik about. It turns out he wasn't chayta. He could take the carbon. He made that neder. He said, "I'm bringing this carbon." He was makadosh it because of the past, because he was mechoyev in asham tali, but he's no longer mechoyev in asham tali, so that goes free. He could just become schulin. Divrei Reb Meir. They say no. He brought it because he was mesupik, and he was mesupik. So he doesn't have the right to just bring it back into chulin. He has to. And it's not just it's really like a takanas chachamim that they understand that he knew he was mechoyev the asham tali, so he was geimer in his head that he wants this to be a carbon. So now it becomes brought as it switches. It becomes oilus nedava. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yaakov. He says you should bring as a asham tali. He could bring it for this even because you could bring an asham tali as a, just as a what do you call it, a default, a catch-all asham tali, like Rashi says. You could just bring a stam asham tali, almost like you bring an oil or a shlamim. You want asham tali because you don't know. We're all always in doubt whether we did something wrong. Like Rafael probably tells his daughter after he patches her and says, "It's not me." So he says, "No, but you did it for something. You deserve it for something else."
Never any patches.
No patches.
No patches.
Doesn't even know what I'm talking about.
No.
Never heard
No
of
clue.
patches. Yeah. So as the Brisa continues, Mishen Nishchat, this is all where he found out that he wasn't over before he was shechted. Mishen Nishchat, but he found that after he shechted the Asham Tali, Noida Loi, he finds out that he had not been over on the Isser, Adam Yishavach. You have to pour out the dam, V'abasa Yisarif, like the first time that there's no chiyuv whatsoever of Asham Tali under those circumstances. Nizr Kadam, if you went even past that, you shachted the behema and you azarik the dam, habasa yachal. At that point, it's all over. He already brought the asham tali. He did it. It was all done properly. It was mechuyev at it at all points. And like we say, once there's a zrika's dam, you already had the kapara, so the basar is kosher. Rabbi Yossi Omer, he goes back on the previous thing that we said. Afilu adam b'kois, even if you shechted and he hadn't yet found out before the shechita, and he was mekabel adam in the kois, yizrak v'abasu yachal. He says even in that case, even before the zrika, you can continue on and be zarik the dam. But Amar Rava explains, Rabbi Yossi b'shitas Reb Shimon Amar. He's holding like Reb Shimon Amar Kala Imid Lizrik Kazarik Dami. He's saying from this din that we've been discussing that Reb Shimon is the man Dama who says whatever is Imid Lizrik is Kazarik Dami. So, but this is the Chayr Legabi, a din that's similar to Tumah. It's not like Kedusha that we're saying the Kedusha is Paka. It should be like the Tumah. So it's making it into a basar that could be eaten. The Gemara, Bidu Taima, is that really the reason for Rabbi Yossi? The Gemara says, L'chayr, it's not the reason for Rabbi Yossi. Amir Marovish made Rabbi Yossi Bachanina Hainu time of the Rabbi Yossi. Because of a klisharis makachin sapsul and lechatchila likarv. He says a chiddush thing. We've come across the concept that something once it's oila on the mizbech, it's lo yarad if it reaches a certain level of kedusha. He says the same thing. Once the dam gets into the klisharis, it's mekadosh it even if it later becomes puzzle with not a full-fledged psul. I mean, we're not talking about a psul of yaitz or a psul of tumah, but if it has this kind of psul where it's puzzle because the bailim are not they found out, and therefore the reason for the original Asham Tali is taken away, but it's still, he brought it, he shechted it with the proper kavanas and with the proper, at that time, his proper frame of mind. So it's Makadosh Lechatchila that it's even able to go on and be Makar of it. Amalei Rav Ashi Rav Kahana. In the Ara of Shimon, Kol Oim Elizrik Kazarak Dami, yes, a kasha. If you say Kol Oim Elizrik is Kazarak Dami, Kol Oim Elizrik if it's Nami Kazarak Dami, then that means a corollary of that would be something that's intended to be burnt should be treated as if it's already burnt. If that's the case, how could we say the original brisa that we started from was we said a nicer and a para that even that a para since it's aimid liftais and nicer since it was mutter before the time and it became nicer. But how could they be considered an eichel if their fate is that they're supposed to be burnt? Let's say the same way that dam that's aimid lizrik is gazarg dam. Let's say this is something that's as if it's already non-existent. Once it's burnt, it's certainly not an eichel. So let's say it's already not an eichel. After ba'almaninu, amalei chivas hakodesh mekashrosen. We came across this concept a blot or two ago. That is coming from a different angle. The reason why they're going to be eichel at that point, it's really going to be from the concept of the Gemara. It's a chalent of the two things. First of all, it's chivas hakodesh mekashrosen that even though it's not really an eichel, because of something that's kachim has an extra push behind it to be treated as an eichel, together with the fact that we said that the kaidal it had which saying it had a shas hakosher beforehand that was made it into a meichel. So therefore, between the two of those things, it's going to be considered an eichel. Amalei Ravina Rashi nihid mahanilu chivas hakodesh lifsulei the gufay. Okay, I can concede what you're saying. That chivas hakodesh is an independent reason to say that it should be tumas eichlin should apply. But that should only apply. There's two sides to everything that's tamei. First of all, that the thing becomes kamei. It's sulei the gufe, that the thing becomes tamei and it no longer can be eaten as kachim that apostle it can't be eaten. L'kriya tamei nami lemimni be'rishim v'sheni. But does it also get the kayach to be metama something else from the fact that we're treating it as if it's an eichel because of chivas hakodesh? Does that also supply enough force to this tumah to be metama other things? If that's the case, tifshit deboy Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish had this exact question. Tzrid shel menachos, the dry part of a mincha, the part of a mincha that does not have oil soaked into it. So something that doesn't flour, that never became wet, does not have a din. It needs to be huksha by the application of a liquid to be considered something that's makabel tumah. But this mincha never got it. But it was certainly, its chivas hakodesh would apply to it. So he asked the question: Moinim by Rishon v'Sheni, ain't Moinim by Rishon v'Sheni? Does it have, while it's certainly tamei itself, does it have the power to be metama other things? So why? If we're saying over here that because of chivas hakodesh, the noiser and the para are both going to be treated, we're assuming as full-fledged tumas, that not just they become tamei, but they also are metama other things. L'chayr, that should be a raya on this question of how Rav Shimon holds about it. No, that question of Reish Lakish was something that is tamei deraisa, but noise and paraduma that they are going to be tuma. We're only saying that midirabanan they're going to be. We're saying over here that they're tamei because of chivas hakodesh. Maybe that's only derabanan. We don't know if it means deraisa. It's going to be metama other things, and that's what Reish Lakish was really asking. Okay, zok the Mishnah. Ha'omer harei alai b'machvas. Someone says, I'm going to bring a mincha in a machvas. V'hevi b'marchashes. And then he comes to the Beis Hamikdash and he puts the flour into the marchashes. or b'machashas. He said he's going to bring a machashas, behevi b'machmas. Masha hevi. What he did is done, meaning it's going to be treated as a kosher mincha, but it's, as we're going to see in the Gemara, it's just treated as a new mincha under the as the one he had what he actually did. But he's not yotza his chiyuv of bringing what he had originally said. He said, "I'm bringing a machashas," and he brought a machvas. So now he brought a machvas. He still has to bring a machashas. But however, that's what he said. Harei alai. When he said it's on me. Zu lahevi b'machvas. But if he said about, he took a isaron of flour and he said, I want this isaron of flour to be a machvas. V'hevi machashas, and he brought a machashas. Machashas v'hevi machvas, harei ze psula. That's possible because he's not bringing as he had said. He was mekadesh it with the status of a machashas, and he brought it as a machvas. It was done incorrectly. A similar din in a different context. He said, I'm bringing two esroinis, two isarons of flour, lahevi b'kli echad. And I'm going to bring them all in one kli. It's going to be a double, two isaron mincha. Behevi b'shnei kelim. Instead, he separated it into two menachos of one isaron each. B'shnei kelim behevi b'kli echad. He took shnei kelim and he brought it in one. He said he was going to do it with two kelim, and then he consolidate them into one. Masha hevi. It's treated as a new mincha, but his original mincha was not yotze. Rashi has a complicated explanation, which causes all sorts of problems about that this is because of the problems with the kmitza. You're supposed to have one. If you say it's in one kli, then there's one kmitza. If you say two, then there's two. So he's affecting the total size of the mincha, and he's affecting the kmatza. But he said, "Elu b'kli echad." That's all the case if he just said harei alai. But if he said about this flour, "Elu b'kli echad v'hevi b'shnei kelim," said, "I want to bring this in one kli," and he instead brought it in two kelim. B'shnei kelim v'hevi b'kli echad. But he said, "I want to bring it in two kelim," and he brought it in one kli. Elu psulim, just like we said by the machas and machashas. In this case, where he specified a specific flour. So he can't say then that I'm bringing it as something else, because he was talking about that flour in particular. Now the Mishnah is going to explain like a variation of this. Harei alai shnei esroinis lahevi b'klei echad, which is the second case that we had just described, and we said harei alai, not where he said harei zu. He said, I'm bringing two esroinis, and I'm bringing one kli, lahevi b'shnei kelim, and he brought it in one kli. But the people said to him, what are you doing? Why are you bringing in two kelim? You said you're doing it in one kli. Ekriva b'shnei kelim, and he went ahead and he brought in shnei kelim psulim. Then it's going to be puzzle. Even though we said harei alai, that it's kosher because we say that he's intending to bring a different carbon now, a different mincha, but in this case, where he was addressed and he was told you bring it wrong, and he did not respond and say I'm changing my mind and this is what I decided to do instead. He just kept quiet. That means he was actioning zechais, and he's saying no, even though I originally said I'm doing it in one, now I want to do it in two. So therefore, he's passing it. He's trying to bring the wrong carbon now. But kli echad ksher. But if he brings it in one kli, then it's kosher. Obviously, that's what he said he was going to do originally, and that's what he's doing now. Harei alai shnei yisrael lahevi b'shnei kelim v'hevi b'kli echad. Amaloi b'shnei kelim l'darte kivu shnei kelim ksherim. That's kli echad kshtei menachos shenisarvu. If he would do it, if he does, that he had originally said he wanted to do it with two, and now he's doing it with one. He's mixing together two kelim, like Rashi had explained, and therefore you can have the problems with his kaimitz that instead of having two separate kmitzas, you can only have one. Okay, Zakdama. So that's really the same thing as we said before, but we're just making this added qualifier that if his actions show that he's still sticking with his original intention, then we don't say it's treated as a new carbon. Zakdama. Utricha. Why do we have to say both machvas and machashas as well as two kelim and one kelim? The Yashmin hach kamaisa. We just said machas and machas mishum da alma machas kamaisa machashes. He said one. He said two different names. One was a machas, one's a machashes. Whether where he said two and he did one, or vice versa, but they were both either machas or machashes. Maybe we'll say this is not an important distinction. The fact that he said two and he did one, that he wasn't really makabel that on himself. That wasn't such a definitive statement. But machas and machashes is very definitive. V'yashmin and hach, and the other way around also. Mishum de kapolaglu. When he said two and now he's doing one, that's a whole different thing. One is two and one is one. Aval hasam delay polig bay. But if it's just a question of machas and machashes, maybe he wasn't so medayik on that. That wasn't so important to him. The amount of minchas he was bringing is important, but he wasn't so medayik on which one exactly he's bringing. Ema loy sricha. That's what we say both of them. Tan rabban masha hevi yid v'yadein yid nidroi lo yat. So we said if he was told you're making a mistake and he actioned dice and he didn't respond, he said he's not yotza. I'm sorry, is that right? Is that where Rav Shimon is? No, Rav Shimon is not at the end. Rav Shimon's right at the beginning. Rav Shimon disagreed, and he said, Rav Shimon says, I'm sorry, this is a new brisa. So the first thing that we had said, that if he brings it not like he had said originally, he's not yaitza. Rav Shimon says he's even yaitza his neder. Zula hevi b'machlas. If he said, rather than said harei alai, he said, I'm going to bring this flour in a machlas. Frak the Gemara vatanya likitchim klisharis. We said that if you take the silas for a macheshes and you put it into a different type of klisharis, the klisharis is not makadosh it. It doesn't belong in it. So why are we saying when he puts it into this kli, if he's maybe it into this kli, let's just ignore it because it's not makadosh it at all. So it doesn't. It's as if he said at the beginning, I want this to be a machmas, and then he put it into his grocery cart to take it home, and he said, this should be a machashes. If it's not makadosh it doesn't have any status. The fact that at that point he put it into a machashes when it's supposed to be a machmas. It's true that when you put it in the incorrect klisharis, it doesn't have the kid. It's not makadosh it that you can go on and take the kmitza from it. It's not makadosh it that you're able to go on with the hakrava, but it is enough of a kiddush to passel it that it's going against what he originally said. Another din. This is all only talking about if at the beginning when he said, right now, I decided I'm going to bring a mincha in a machlas. And he says, Harei olai, I'm mekabel myself a machlas. Avashas hafrasha. But if it was at a later point, he had already said, I'm bringing a machlas. Or he said, I'm bringing a mincha. But then, when he went to go get that silas to separate it for this mincha that he had previously taken on it, and at that point he said, I want it to be a machashes instead of a machlas. That doesn't have any effect. It has to be at the time of the dara, the original neder, and not when you're separating the flour. They say it's only talking about when he was kaveya at the time of neder. Has to be at the time of the neder, not the time of hafrasha. The Olam got another little bit of time to do the next Mishnah. Yeah? Okay. If anyone has to go, feel free. There's no, we're not forcing you. Past, you did your duty. Zok the Mishnah. Someone says, I'm bringing a mincha from Sa'irim, which is nonsense. You can't bring a mincha from Sa'irim. The only Sa'irim is Aimer and the Shtei Alechem. Everything else is from Silas. Yavi Menachitim. He has to bring from flour. We ignore the part that he said that he's going to bring a mincha from Sa'irim. We listen to the mincha part, we don't listen to the Sa'irim part. Kamach, if he said I'm bringing from kamach, which is coarser flour, Yavi Silas. Silas is the only flour that's qualified for a mincha, so he has to bring from the proper. He's mechuyev to bring the mincha, and he has to bring from regular flour. Beloy shem and beloy levina, which you're not allowed to bring a minchas nadava without them. Yavi shem and levina. He has to bring both. Chatzi yisar, and he said I'm bringing a chatzi yisar. Now mincha has to be a full yisar. Yavi yisar and shalom. He has to bring a full yisar. Yisar and umechza. He said I'm bringing a yisar and a half. Yavi shnaim. He has to bring shnaim. The Gemara later on is going to explain how do you get to shnaim when he said 1.5. We explained that when he said the half, that's disregarded, and it's the one is considered one, and the half is considered another one because we disregard the fact that he limited to. There's no such thing as bringing in increments of a half a yisar. Reb Shimon paita shaloi hisnadiv kederech hamisnadvin. Reb Shimon says it's potter. All these cases that you have to look at the entire neder. We said we'll listen to the part that he said I'm bringing a mincha, but we're disregarding the fact that he said impossible tonight. Shimon says no. When you have to look at the whole statement, and since it contains something that indicates that he doesn't really mean it, so it's not an adava. Dr. Gemara. This should be familiar. We had this in the Gemara back about 3 weeks ago. This exact Gemara. So why do we say that this is a kosher neder? Let's say, just bring the first example. He says, I'm bringing a mincha min hasa'irim. So he said mincha, but then he said min hasa'irim. So min hasa'irim is intended to be a retraction. He's being chayzer on what he said. And it's within Teich Kadei Dibur, so you should be able to be chayzer. It's a neder with its pesach, with its refutation together with it. Amar Chizkiya, Hamani Beis Shammai. This is going to Beis Shammai. The Amar Tfais Lashon Rishon. He says, in this circumstance, we look at the first thing that he said. He said mincha. We don't say that the second thing he said is the refutation, but rather that's what he really meant to do is the mincha, and the second part is just him doing what? We disregard it. That's the main thing. It's not. Someone says, I want to be a nazir, but I have to stay away from figs and dried figs, which is no such din by a nazir. Nazir is only kept away from wine. So Beis Shammai, I am nazir. Beis Shammai says we disregard the nonsense at the end. We just twice lashon rishon. Zil ain't a nazir. Reb Shimon says it's not a nazir because we say it's a nadu pischayimai. He said the neder, but then immediately retracted it. So we want to say that's our mandamovi is like Beis Shammai who says he is a nazir, not like Beis Hillel who says he's not a nazir. No, our Mishnah could even be like Beis Hillel. But which is the exact same lesson we had in the Gemara before. We're talking about a specific case where the person who said, I want to be a nazir, or in our case, where he said, I want to bring a mincha min hasa'irin. He said, I only said I want to bring hasa'irin because I got mixed up. I thought since you bring a aimer and I saw people bring barley, so I thought I could also do it. But if you would have told me before, there's no such thing as barley, I definitely would have brought from wheat. So then he never intended to do anything other than bring a regular mincha. That's Rabbi Yechon. Amar Chizkiya. So Chizkiya was the one, you have to remember, who said before, Amar Chizkiya Hamani Beis Shammai. Now Chizkiya says, Amar Chizkiya lo yishanu the Amar mincha min hasa'irin. This din that we say in the Mishnah, that it's a valid mincha, is where he said, mincha min hasa'irin. Ava Amar mincha min ha'adashim. But if he would have said instead of barley, he would have said beans. A barley is a person can make a mistake because there is such a thing as the aimer and the shtei alechem. But beans is no such thing as beans being brought as a mincha. Loi. Now Michti, Chizkiya Kaman Amar L'Shmaitzke Beis Shammai. He said like Beis Shammai. He didn't say the Rabbi Yochanan Pshat and Beis Hillel that we say he said afterwards that I made a mistake. If I would have known the truth, I would have done it. So on that, you could understand that it's a difference with where if he says adashim, he can't afterwards say if I would have known, I would have done it, because no one can make the mistake of saying beans. But he understood it. But Chizkiah was one who said like Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai mishum twice lashon rishonu. Beis Shammai says because we just look at the first thing he said. Mali min asarim, mali min adashim. In that case, sarim and adashim are irrelevant. And for the Gemara, Hadabei, Einachanami, Chizkiah was Chayzer, and he said in the end, like the Pshat Rabbi Yochanan said that it could even be going on Beis Hillel, where he specified that he wouldn't have said it if he would have known, and therefore it makes a difference of whether it's only by Sa'ir or not by Kadashim. My time Hadabei, what was the reason why Chizkiah was Chayzer to say like Rabbi Yochanan? Amrava Masizan Kashisa, because it was shver on him in the Mishnah. Why did Taka say Sarim? Listen min Adoshim. Let it say min Adoshim, which is a bigger chiddush, even if he said something that's further from what is a real carbon. It's still kosher because you say twice lashon rishon. El shmami no mishum de toyu. It must be because of toys. Basarim toy badoshim le toy. It must be like this chilik that we're just saying now. That because adoshim, the only reason why it said sarim is because adoshim would taka not be believed. Rabbi Yochanan Amafilim and Adoshim. Now the Gemara says Chizkiah said Fakir from himself. Rabbi Yochanan also says Fakir himself. Afilim and Adoshim. But we just said there's no way to believe him when he says Kadoshim. Michti Rabbi Yochanan Kwan Amal Shmais Beisil Beisil Mishum de Toyu. Besarim Toy Badoshim Le Toy. You wouldn't make a mistake by Adoshim. So how could he say even by Adoshim? So everything we want to know. L'dvar of the Chizkiah Kamala. He's only refuting the raya that Chizkiah had brought from the Mishnah. At my time of Hadartabach. Why were you chayzer? Because it didn't say min adoshim. That which it didn't say min adoshim is saying it's telling you a different chiddush. It's telling you not just adoshim, but even sa'irim. Loimi min adoshim ikalameim mahader hu dahadabe who twice lashon rishon. By adoshim, we would say there's more reason to say that you were chayzer, and then we go bas twice lashon rishon. By Sa'irim, you have a reason to say that maybe he made a mistake. Twice lashon rishon. Even so, the twice lashon rishon, and we believe him. Amar Zeiri, loy shanu elo da amar mincha. This is all. This that we say that his mincha is a good mincha. That's only if he actually said that we say twice lashon rishon, and we follow the first thing he said. He says mincha min haSa'irim. Avaloy Amar Mincha, which Rashi says, where he said, instead of Mincha Min HaSa'irim, he said Mincha Sa'irim, without the Min HaSa'irim. Loy. Then he won't be believed. Then he's not, we're not twice Lashon Rishon, it's all one statement. You can't divide it into two things and say twice Lashon Rishon. Yosef Rav Nachman Kamal Al Shemaitza said this over. Esvei Rav Nachman Kemach Yavi Silas. What about the continuation of the Mishnah? If he said Kemach, he should bring Silas. He has to bring Silas. Lav Dali Amar Mincha. Doesn't say that he said Mina Mincha. So Mulchayrit talking about even where he didn't say Mincha. So Gemara Loi Da Amar Mincha. Next part of the Gemara, Loi Shemin Levayna Yavi Shemin Levayna. My Lav Dali Amar Mincha. Isn't also talking about where he didn't say Mincha. Loi Da Amar Mincha. Chatzi Saran Yavi Chatzi Yavi Saran Shalim. My Lav Dali Amar Mincha. Loi Da Amar Mincha. Now finally we get to the problem. Ihachi Ema Seifa. We said Isarnu Mechza. You should bring two. Kivin the Ava Mincha. So that the only way to understand it is Kivin the Ava Mincha. See, since he said Mincha min Menachatzi min Isarnu Mechza, Ichayev le Bisar. Since he said Mincha is Mechayev in Isarn. Ki Amar Chatzi Isarn le Klum Ka Amar. So over here we run into a problem. So we're talking about. He says, "I'm saying hare alai mincha," but once he says mincha, then he asks that itself, the mincha was mechayev in Isar, and then when he says hafi Isarin, that's loy klub. That was nonsense. You can't bring hafi Isarin. So why? How do we get to say that he should bring two Israelim? Right? He said. What was the lashon of the Mishnah? The lashon of the Mishnah was Isarin umechza yavishnayim. So he said, Harei alai minchas isarin, and then umechza, so isarin, mincha of isarin is one. Then the umechza is nothing. So how do you get to two? We reverse it. We didn't say mincha umechza, isarin umechza, but rather he said mechza and an isarin. The kibbud amar mincha, when he said mincha, ichayiv le bisarin ki amar chatzi isarin v'loy klum. We ignore the chatzi isarin ka amar ki hada amar isarin ma'isi isarin achbin, and then the second isarin can be its own isarin. So that's how you get to two. In the Brisa, Rav Shimon was chaylik because he said he did not do the dava in the proper way. Amai, why is that? Amar Rav Shimon b'shiz Rabbi Yossi Amar Amar af b'gmar dvar of adam matvis. It's because he holds that we have to look at the entire phrase of a person, and in the end of his phrase, he said something that makes this to be not a mincha. So Rav Shimon, the whole thing is bottle. We disregard everything he said. We'll stop here. Thank you.